Okay, folks, thanks for coming along tonight. We have a discussion, as you know, on the United States presidential election 2024, two views. And we've got two good friends of the Sydney Institute along who have different views, I suspect. So we're going to lead off with Bruce Wolpe, who's a senior fellow non-resident at the United States Study Centre. He's a dual Australian-American citizen, and his most recent book is Trump's Australia, which was published recently by Ellen and Unwin. And Tom Switzer, who spent about 10 years of his life living in the United States. He's worked with the American Enterprise Institute, and of course currently Executive Director of the Centre for Independent Studies. Bruce writes occasionally in the Sydney Morning Herald, Tom in the Australian. So we're going to lead off with Bruce, and then we go to Tom, and then we go to questions and discussion. Many thanks.
Thank you, Gerard and Ann, and Tom. Is absolutely. We've done this for several election cycles, and one day we'll be wrong, and we'll figure it out. But when Ann calls, you've got to answer, and it was a pleasure to do it. So thank you very much. We're going to talk about the U.S. election, and I'm going to present with some help with some slides on the state of play. I just want you to understand the election as I see it. Just in terms of what is occurring and why. It really is a nonpartisan view. And so I want to take you through several metrics in the campaign. The first is just how close it is. And it has been close at the national level and the state level. So this is the New York Times Siena poll from last week. As you can see, it's 48-47. It's 1 point within the margin of error, well within the margin of error. And then this is Real Clear Politics poll average, 48.5, 47.5, again, just as close as can be. Harris 47, Trump 44, also within the margin of error. And this has been consistent for the months, as far as first Biden and then with Harris. Harris did not make that big a difference. When she came in, Biden was was also in the low 40s, tied with Trump. And then this is the state by state. As you know, the U.S. election is determined not by the popular vote, but by the Electoral College and who carries how many states and what those states contribute to the ultimate outcome. There are 7 considered swing states. For decades, 43 states have voted consistently. New York always votes Democratic, Massachusetts, California, and so forth. Iowa always votes Republican. Ohio has voted Republican. Obama carried it in 2008, but in any event, they're pretty static. So the 7 swing states are what's called that blue wall in the upper Midwest, the industrial states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Those are the states that Trump won in 2016 to the surprise and dismay of Hillary Clinton and why he won that election. There are also now swing states in the Sun Belt, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and lately North Carolina. And as you can see, in all those swing states, it's virtually tied. Here's another poll, just again ratifying the same conclusion that in the swing states, it's just extremely tight. No one has a decisive edge. And more in the battleground states. As you can see, Harris is up by a point or 2. Trump is up by a point in Arizona. North Carolina by 1/10 of 1 point. Georgia by 3/10 of a point. So this is all in play. And that's why you see the candidates go to these states. No one's campaigning in Vermont, I can assure you of that. The next thing that's really important is to where do they stand in terms of who's considered favorable, who's considered unfavorable, their favorability ratings. First with Trump, he has never cracked 50% approval. He's always in the 40s. And in this election, he will never crack 50% of the electorate. He'll be in the high 40s. But the view of him has been consistent. He has a base. It is between 43 and 47%. They are, we like to say in Australia, is someone's rusted on. These guys are welded on. And they are with him absolutely. It doesn't matter what he says, what he believes and so forth. They like him. They like what he stands for. They want him to succeed, and they want him in power. But there is that gap between favorable and unfavorable, which is significant. So let's go to Harris. As you can see, this is Biden and then Harris. She's in the purple. The unfavorable is in amber. This line, I think, is really significant. That was Afghanistan. So Joe Biden was in the mid to high 50s. In the first few months of office, the Afghanistan withdrawal happened. It was a tragedy, and he never recovered in terms of favorability. As vice president, she inherits that from him, and that's where she was. But then when he stepped aside and she enters the race and is acclaimed by all sides of the Democratic Party, as you can see, she's almost erased all the unfavorable gap. And so it's even moving into favorable territory. So the point is, she's considered more favorably than Donald Trump, and that is a factor in the election. So it's tight, and her favorability has been up. The next question, which frames the election, is how do people feel about the United States, the country? Where is it going? And the key question that's been asked by pollsters for a long time is the country moving in the right direction or is it on the wrong track? And here, 30% believe the country's in the right direction and 70% believe it's on the wrong track. And that means it's time for a change. Now, who's the change? Do they want to change Biden and Harris or do they want to change Trump, who's been around for 8 years now? It almost feels like he's the incumbent, but he's not. She is. And do people want to change? So that's another factor that comes into this. So we have those sort of status issues, and then there are the major issues in the campaign. And aside from Trump and his character, and aside from her and association with Biden and how people perceive them and the parties, there are three major issues in this campaign. The first is inflation. This is a chart which shows inflation since Joe Biden says we have the strongest economy in the world. We're the best practice. We're doing everything right, jobs created and so forth. And at a macro level, he's right. But the lived experience of Americans today is just like the lived experience here when Albanese was elected. Inflation is up by 20 to 30% from the day they were elected. And interest rates are at record highs, or record since the early 1990s. So what they're reacting to is this. And this is why, and if you're president, you own the economy, and if you're prime minister, you own the economy, and this is why their approval ratings are so low. And they will stay low until interest rates come down. Interest rates will begin coming down in the United States next week. And that could be a lift of some sort to Harris because it means that the era of high inflation rates is over and the horizon looks better. That may help her a little bit. And when you have a 1-point race, every point helps. And so she'll be looking at that. The next issue that's huge is immigration. Trump owns that issue. And this is a chart of the pattern of migrants at the border coming into the United States. Scares the hell out of people. And so they react very strongly to that issue. Compared to here, of course, where everyone just welcomes immigrants, as often as possible, whether they come by boat or... And so I'm just saying that the emotive effect of that issue is as strong there as it is here, and it's a huge driver in the election, and Trump owns it. The third issue is abortion and abortion rights. This is a map of where abortion issues are on the ballot in November. It's when the Supreme Court repealed Roe v. Wade. It's the first time that I can remember when the Supreme Court has neutered, reversed a right under the Constitution that people have been enjoying. And Roe v. Wade was first decided over 50 years ago. And so therefore something that women across the country and their families and the people associated with them have had for 50 years in terms of what they can do on reproductive rights and their health has been taken away. And so what the Supreme Court said, we can't find it in the Constitution, no constitutional right exists. So it goes back to the states, and each state will decide what to do with abortion. And they have, and they are. They're in process of doing it. And in every state where there's been a retreat from abortion laws that existed under Roe, that have held ballots on it, the abortion rights movement has succeeded. So even in states like Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, they have voted for abortion rights. So in Republican states, red states, they have. So what's interesting about this map is that Nevada and Arizona, if you know your geography, and Florida are Nevada and Arizona are swing states. So they're going to go to the polls. It's almost certain that those referenda will pass in those states. So are women and others going to vote, yes, let's restore rights, and then I'm going to vote for Trump? Don't know. Florida's the same issue. Florida has a 6-week abortion ban. It's one of the strictest in the country. Trump, after waffling for a long time, said, I'm going to vote to keep it. And that's made millions of women in Florida angry. So are they going to vote for their rights and then vote for Trump? Florida's not considered in play, but I really wonder after this if it is. So those are the three big drivers of this campaign. So then and then the question is, well, who can manage these issues better? And what this graph shows from Fox News, I just wanted to be authoritative about it, that when people are asked, well, who's best to manage immigration and inflation? It's Trump by a decisive margin, more than 10 points. So people say, that's an issue I care about. I trust him, and I want him to do it. So the biggest issues are cutting in his favor. And the same thing, who makes good decisions about economic policy? Trump, 55-45. Who makes decisions about immigration policy that you like? Trump, 52-45. But then Harris, who can bring the country closer together? Harris can, 41-36. And then who makes the good decisions about abortion? Harris, 55-44. So when people are they voting to bring the country together? They want that, or are they voting their pocketbook issues and the emotional issues and the immigration issues? So all of this is converging on how this election will be decided. Just another thing on Harris and Trump on abortion, democracy, the economy, and immigration. As you can see, Trump is in a commanding position on those issues. If you're in a commanding position on the issues and people think those are the big issues, that can give you a really big edge. So then the question is, well, who's enthusiastic about voting for either candidate? This is from Gallup about a couple weeks ago. Blue is Democratic, red is Republican. Here, the red is Labor, of course. As you can see, Harris comes in towards the end of the chart, and suddenly enthusiasm in the Democratic Party shoots up to 78%. But Trump has not gotten more enthusiastic support. He has his base. He hasn't grown it. So it's sort of static. So there's an emotive element here which breaks for her. Issues break for him. Emotive elements break for her. And then on the characteristics of voters. So it's a little hard to read, but I think the key things are where certain demographic groups are in this campaign. So black voters are for Harris, 84%, but Joe Biden had 90% in 2020 when he won very narrowly. Hispanic voters are 57. It has to be close to 65 if you're going to win the election. Ages 18 to 29, the under 30s, 63, but it really should be closer to 80. So she's gaining in all these groups, but she's not there yet. And we have 7 weeks to go. But that's what she's focused on. So this all gets distilled, and this is the Electoral College. It's going to elect these things. So those yellow states, the 3 in the upper Midwest, the Sun Belt states, will decide it. If all the other states vote the way the colors are, and she carries Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, she wins by exactly the number that you need of a majority of the Electoral College, 270 votes. If Trump can take Pennsylvania, if Trump can take Pennsylvania and those other states like North Carolina and Georgia, he will win. So that is why this thing is as close as can possibly be. She has more paths to 270 because she has narrowed. You saw the lines. They were even in all those states. They were originally, Trump was carrying them by 5 or 6 points. So if she can actually win Nevada and Arizona, partially on the strength of abortion, if she can come back in Georgia, and North Carolina is suddenly open because the Republican running for governor is a complete nutcase, and people hate him, and he's trailing his Democratic opponent by 20 points. Maybe he carries her to victory in North Carolina. So if she wins North Carolina, that can offset losses someplace else. So that's why she feels that she really has a path to this election. And people ask me, well, who's going to win? I say, I can't tell you. I just can't tell you. And that's why.
Well, thank you, Bruce. Always great to be with you, my friend. And also Gerard, Anne, and Jacqueline, thanks so much for having both of us back here at City Institute. As Bruce demonstrated, all the available polling evidence indicates that Kamala Harris has drawn even with Donald Trump or is narrowly ahead of him in the battleground states. But the question I'd put to all of you this evening is, who believes the polls these days? In 2016 and even 2020, polls massively understated Donald Trump's strengths. Indeed, at this stage of both elections, the Democrat candidates, Hillary Clinton, 2016, and Joe Biden, 2020, they both held commanding double-digit leads over the Republican firebrand. Yet both elections were exceedingly close. Ever heard of the joke about Trump and the polls? It goes like this, quote, "Donald Trump is so far behind in the polls, it reminds one of the night he won the presidency." Then again, the polls before the November 2022 congressional midterm elections show that the Republicans would win the House of Representatives convincingly. Those polls too were wrong, which reminds me of another joke about Donald Trump and the polls. Quote, "The latest Fox News election poll shows Trump way ahead in all 87 states." So really, no one really knows, as Bruce said, what will happen on November 5. But one thing seems very clear to me, that this is the most volatile and unpredictable presidential election season since 1968. Now, this was with the race riots, the war protests, the burning of the cities, and of course, political assassinations. Some of you may remember that election. And if you think about the 2024 election, just think about the extraordinary twists and turns we've experienced so far, just in the last couple of months. The pathetic debate performance of a sitting president, the near assassination of a former president at a campaign rally, the sudden scratching of the incumbent president from the race, the sudden elevation of a vice president her own party deemed a serious liability, the same VP drawing even or even slightly ahead of her Republican challenger, a presidential debate in which one of the candidates spread debunked claims of immigrants abducting and eating law-abiding pets. And now, lo and behold, just this morning, yet another political assassination attempt on a presidential candidate, this time just outside his home. Now, to say again, this is, without a doubt, the most volatile and unpredictable presidential election campaign since the late 60s, which is to say before some of us weren't even born. Now, as Bruce reminded us, to win the White House, a presidential candidate needs to win a majority of these battleground states. So North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Arizona. There are 7 key battleground, or what we would call swing states, at play. The question you have to ask yourself is whether Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, notwithstanding their many flaws, is capable of winning a majority of those battleground states. Well, let's start with Donald Trump. 78-year-old former president and reality television star. It has to be said, he does tap into widespread, legitimate anxieties about the state of the country, whether it's lax border controls or the costs of living, especially energy prices, identity politics, this idea to carve people up into race and religion and gender. And I'd also add the direction of US foreign policy under both first the neoconservatives during the War on Terror and more recently liberal interventionists on the left. In my judgment, and this is a minority view among the Western elite, I think that Trump, and especially his running mate, J.D. Vance, are right about the Ukraine crisis. NATO expansion just provoked Russia, still a great power, with, remember, a vast arsenal of nuclear weapons. It just pushed Russia to push back against Western encroachment in what the Russians have long thought as their sphere of influence long before Lenin and Stalin arrived on the scene. And the best policy now is to shut down this conflict and save lives. If Washington and the West continue to aid and abet the Ukrainians, and not to mention Kiev being given Western long-range missiles to launch deep into Russian territory, we will lead the outmanned and outgunned Ukrainians further down the primrose path. And as Trump, in his weird way, but Vance more articulately, they say we will just waste billions and billions of US dollars and prolong the war, and as a result, more Ukrainians will die, and the risk of nuclear war becomes ever more real. So that's the plus side. The problem with Trump, though, both with respect to Ukraine and other subjects, is that he rarely sets out policy details or arguments that explain issues beyond slogans or abuse. And as last week's debate reminded us, Trump's polarising style of politics is profoundly off-putting, especially to those undecideds and independents and right-leaning suburban voters, all of whom have the capacity to swing elections. Bret Stephens, the award-winning columnist at the New York Times, who was a guest of the think tank, the public policy research organisation, the Centre for Independent Studies that I run, he was a guest at CIS just a few weeks ago. Bret Stephens reflects the views of many Americans on the right intellectual spectrum when he laments that Trump, quote, has done the most to reshape the Republican Party into something unrecognisable to someone like me who grew up in Ronald Reagan's shadow. In Stephens' judgment, Trump's main crime is to, quote, smash the old conservative consensus. This is the old conservative consensus to which old people like Bret and I subscribe. That is a belief in classically liberal ideals like free trade, fiscal prudence, competitive markets, controlled but large-scale immigration, as well as some classically conservative virtues like the necessity of moral character in political leadership and civility in public life. Remember, Trump proposes a tariff increase of 10% across the board, which is only reminiscent of the kind of trade protectionism that helped turn the Great Recession into the Great Depression in the 1930s. Remember too Trump's support for a mass deportation of immigrant workers who have frankly been a source of American growth. And then there's Trump's character and temperament, not to mention, quite frankly, the weird and wacky company he keeps, including online conspiracists and election and Holocaust deniers. One of these folks is a lady by the name of Laura Luna, who has claimed that, among other things, September 11 terror attacks were, quote, an inside job. What do you think? Osama bin Laden was in the pay of the CIA? And she says that if Kamala Harris wins the election, quote, the White House will smell like curry, which is a jibe at Kamala Harris's Indian heritage. Why on earth would a presidential candidate listen to the likes of Laura Loomer? Is this who the next 4 years are going to feature? But the problem, you see, goes beyond Trump's electoral prospects. And I'll get to Harris eventually. This is the Wall Street Journal editorial page. In my judgment, it is the best publication for thinking conservatives in the world. I've been reading it virtually every day for the last 30 years when I lived in Washington. This is the Wall Street Journal, just a few days ago. Quote, "A growing segment of the American right is populated by and susceptible to cranks and conspiracists." The Journal goes on to say, "A movement that used to admire William F. Buckley Jr. and Thomas Sowell," and I'd add Charles Krauthammer, Milton Friedman, Irving Kristol, all these folks. This now elevates a pseudo-historian who blames Winston Churchill for World War II and media personalities who sell falsehoods as a triumph for free speech. The Wall Street Journal concludes, "This is not an intellectual or political movement that is going to win converts, nor will it deserve them." It's the Wall Street Journal. And then there's Kamala Harris, the 59-year-old vice president and former senator from California. Now, the prospect of America having its first female president, who's also mixed black and Indian, that has, not surprisingly, energised millions. Not just ethnic minorities, but also the young and those who have never voted. And presumably, some of them listen to Taylor Swift. Harris's surprisingly good performance at last week's debate reminds one of the old adage that low expectations are a priceless political gift. But Harris is also a San Francisco Democrat, a metropolitan sophisticate whose politics are fundamentally at odds with those of Middle America. And she has chosen as her running mate a bloke named Tim Walz, a fellow left-winger from another left-wing state, Minnesota, which has not voted in a presidential election for a Republican since 1972, when Richard Nixon won all but one states in 1972. This ticket, the Harris and the Walz ticket, promises more of the same regulation and subsidies of Joe Biden, plus, according to the Wall Street Journal, tax increases of $5 trillion. This, as Harris tacks and changes her lines on various issues. Remember, Harris, like the Democratic left, has supported many unpopular and frankly discredited policies, from decriminalising the border and defunding the police to banning fracking and advocating price controls. Now, for those like me who believe that America's strength, from which the world benefits, is the can-do individualism that fuels its economy, Harris and Walz present a worrying prospect. What's also disturbing about Harris is her downright refusal, or her campaign's downright refusal, for her to be subjected to any serious media scrutiny. In the 2 months she's been the Democratic candidate, Harris has faced not one press conference, nor has she subjected herself to a seriously tough interview by a serious journalist. Can you imagine a new Australian or a British Prime Minister or opposition leader shying away from press conferences or not doing any interviews with the likes of the ABC's David Spears or the then BBC's Andrew Neil? Can you imagine them shying away from press conferences weeks and months leading up to an election? The Canberra Press Gallery, like the Westminster Press Gallery, they'd quite rightly be agitated and outraged. And yet the Washington Press Corps, like much of the US mainstream media, they're covering for Harris. This is Gerard Baker, a brilliant columnist at the London Times and the Wall Street Journal. Quote, "The American mainstream media may well do what they nearly got away with doing for Biden the last few years and cover for someone evidently incapable of holding office." So all this makes for a very unhappy nation. As Bruce said, it's a deeply divided country. The electorate is very frighteningly polarised. Finally, for me personally, as someone whose first real job was at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, and someone who's contributed about 30 articles to the best opinion page, the conservative Wall Street Journal editorial pages, and as someone who now heads a centre-right think tank in Sydney, the Centre for Independent Studies, one of our nation's leading centre-right parties, what do I think? Well, I think this is very depressing. I think it reminds me of Henry Kissinger's old joke about the Iraq-Iran war in the 1980s. It's too bad both sides can't lose.
So many thanks to both our speakers tonight. So if you just come up here, you'll need to talk, be in the centre of the room and look into the camera, and you can swap the microphone. Okay, and I'm going to ask, and then I'll lead off with asking, and then I'll ask. So thanks to Bruce for your analysis, thanks to Tom for your policy discussions. I just want to come back to Bruce, because in relation to what Tom said about Ukraine. So how do you think that a Harris administration would look on the Russia-Ukraine war? Now, Tom thinks that you heard what he said about Trump and his vice presidential candidate. What about Harris and her vice presidential candidate?
I think she's made clear that she will continue Biden's policy. She's very eloquent about it in her interview or one of the debate. Yes, during the debate, she just made very strong statements. So I see continuity. What you outlined on Ukraine is actually what Tom Friedman said 20 years ago. Yeah. But 20 years have passed, and unfortunately we have in Putin a man with imperial ambitions. I mean, he wants to recreate the Russian Empire. And if he was not the president, I think Russia would have a different posture and so forth. So we have to live with it. I think I also am worried about providing Ukraine missiles that can strike deep into Russia. I mean, it makes you think, is the October surprise a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine? And what the hell happens after that? But at the same time, you can't reward Russian aggression. In my view, you can't reward Russian aggression. So I think on other foreign policy issues, you'll find Harris in full consonance with Biden, with differences in emphasis, such as on Palestine and two-state solution. She's going to push hard the Israeli government on that and what's happening in Gaza.
Well, just talk, you might just say a bit about Israel-Gaza war.
Well, yeah, sure, sorry. Well, first of all, we are essentially centrists tonight. On Ukraine, though, I think we didn't read a response. I think Bruce reflects the conventional wisdom in the West that Russia, under Putin's leadership, is bent on imperialism, and he wants to integrate all of Ukraine into the Russian Empire. That is the conventional wisdom. I mean, whether it's The Guardian on the left or The Australian and the Wall Street Journal on the right, that is the overwhelming consensus in the Western mainstream media and in public discourse. I would simply say that I think that the taproot of the crisis goes to a NATO expansion, and in late 2021, early 2022, the President, Joe Biden, had an opportunity to put this off the agenda and say to Putin, we will not push NATO expansion into your backyard. And I think what's happened here ever since is that Putin has gone into Ukraine with, remember, 190,000 troops. You look at a map, Ukraine is massive. It's almost double the size of Poland. How many troops did Hitler commit to Western Poland in the late 30s? 1.4 million. 1.4 million. Now, anyway, the point is 1.4 million is a lot more than 190,000 troops in Poland. Western Poland is a lot smaller than all of Ukraine. So the idea of Putin's intervention, in my judgment, and this is Vance's view, and this is a minority view, is that he went in there to wreck Ukraine, to make sure that it would declare its neutrality, that is, not be part of NATO. And it's brutal power politics 101. But the danger now is that the Russians have 20% of Ukraine. This is like Bambi versus Godzilla. The Ukrainians are outmanned and outgunned. The idea is to shut down the conflict now before Russia gets more territory. So I think this is where we're at right now. And, Bruce might be right. There could be an October surprise. If the West, and I know the British are very keen on this, I think Biden's actually quite apprehensive. Yeah. If the Ukrainians get permission to launch Western long-range missiles into Russia, this could easily make a bad situation worse, and there's no telling where this will lead.
You want to make a comment?
No.
You don't? Okay,
There's no reward in it.
Say that again.
Nothing.
Private joke.
Am I right in thinking that the only living president who hasn't proposed a vote for Kamala Harris is George W. Bush on the Republican side, and that he may well do so very soon on the basis of his distaste for Trump's language about immigrants?
Quite conceivably. I think Bush Jr. instinctively is a loyal Republican, but he would be instinctively against everything that Trump is doing on immigration, but also on foreign policy. But here's a joke. Someone I know actually very well actually saw George W. Bush around 2019, 2020, and Trump's poll numbers were coming down. And he said to the president, the former president, "Mr. President, what do you think of Donald Trump? How do you think he's going?" And President Bush said, "Oh, he's doing a great job. We should all get behind him. I think he's doing a fabulous job." And my friend said, it's a true story, he said, but it's Donald Trump, and he's rude, crude, lewd, he's a buffoon, he's undermining everything you stood for. What do you mean? Bush said, "No, he's doing a great job. He's making me look good."
I don't think he's going to. I don't think he's going to endorse Harris.
He's not.
I don't think so. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think so.
Mind you, I think Bruce didn't both Bushes, both George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, and perhaps even Jeb Bush, the former governor of Florida, didn't they endorse Hillary Clinton in 2016?
I don't think so.
Oh, they didn't. Okay.
The answer was you don't think so.
Yeah.
So to make sure we pick it up in the microphones. Yes?
I just wonder if you could...
Wait, one thing. Ronald Reagan would vote against Donald Trump. That I know.
If the speakers could comment on the one factor that probably will decide the election, which is the voting turnout. And what methods are there now for projecting what that might be, and how influential do you think it is?
The graph that I showed on enthusiasm with the big bump up for the Democrats at this stage, so it actually turnout could now exceed the 2020 turnout, which was at a record level.
And percentage-wise, was that about 65, 66%?
Yeah.
Which is quite high for America, because I remember, and you'd remember, Bruce, in the late 80s, early 90s, it was about 50%, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's interesting you brought up the 68 election, Tom, because following that election, even though they were done before that, it was the mass reform of the primary system in the US that has delivered not just presidential candidates that the old wise heads of the party tolerate, but it's also delivered senatorial candidates and congressional candidates, Christine O'Donnell, I Want to Be a Witch, and all that type. Do you think that following this election, whichever way it lands, there will be a move to, by the parties, if they're able to even, regain control of the parties?
On the Democratic side, no. I mean, this is a celebration of democracy on the Democratic side. And when Humphrey could you want an inside job, Hubert Humphrey becoming the nominee in 1968, is that it was an anti-establishment move. That's why you have so many primaries. They're now open primaries, and that's how it's decided. I think here's a question for Australia, whether you want to have open pre-selections.
Bernie Sanders was almost a Democratic candidate.
Pardon?
Bernie Sanders.
Talk very loud.
Yeah, well, he aligns with and he ran for the Democratic nomination. And on the Republican side, there is more openness, not as much. They have rules like winner take all. You win 51% of the vote, then you take, or plurality of the vote. In the primaries, you take all of them. So I don't see the Democratic Party retreating at all. Okay.
Question here, but you have to talk loudly because the microphone's.
Hang on, no, we'll go here, we'll get the microphone.
If that microphone's not working either.
Thank you, gentlemen. Great presentation. The impact of Donald Trump's involvement in the assault on the Capitol building and the continuous legal action against him, what is the impact of that in the various collegiate situations?
I think a lot of people have decided they can't tolerate another Trump term as president, and I think it's a highly motivating factor for many voters. But I think those issues, particularly on the economy, I mean, you may not like Trump as president, but it's called the nostalgia factor in remembering what the economy was like before COVID under Trump, with high employment, high productivity, low taxes, low inflation. And people are hurting now because of interest rates and their incomes aren't rising. And so there is a cut against Trump because of the type of person that he is, what he stands for, the divisiveness. That's why when Harris says, let's turn the page, it's like, enough already. But that is, it's balanced between people wanting more economic security and people believing more that he can handle these things better than she can for a lot of the reasons that Tom cited.
Yeah.
Tom, I doubt that too many people in the swing states read the Wall Street Journal. The US debt position is seeing exponential growth in terms of their debt.
Yes.
And neither party or neither candidate appears to be presenting any path to get them out of it, which has long-term consequences, obviously, for the world economy. Do you have a comment?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And George Will, one of the most distinguished conservative columnists who writes twice a week for the Washington Post since the early 70s, wrote a column on this very subject just 2 days ago. One of my favourite quotes in the current context is from Neil Ferguson, the distinguished Scottish historian who's actually going to be a guest at the think tank that I run next month. And he says that a great power that spends more on servicing its debt than on spending on defence won't remain great for long. It's a real problem, and you're absolutely right. Neither side of politics, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans, excuse me, is serious about tackling the debt and deficit problems. It's a real albatross. Having said all that, and notwithstanding my doom and gloom tonight, we should also remember that the United States economy, all things considered, is doing very well. You know, the unemployment rate is about 4.2%. The inflation rate's about 2.5%. America remains a real trendsetter in the world on artificial intelligence, biotechnology. It's an energy trendsetter. It's now energy independent for the first time since the OPEC oil crisis in 1973. It's higher education institutions, notwithstanding all that ghastly cancel culture that takes place on campuses, but those institutions are still the world's leading institutions of higher learning. So I think that there is a danger in overstating America's problems. It's still got a lot of strengths. It's got incredible capacity for change and renewal. And I don't think that Donald Trump is right when he says America is dying. But none of that should disguise your very real point about the problems that are eating away at American foundations, and one of them is this serious debt problem.
Can I? Is there a gap between support for a generic Republican candidate and the support for Trump? Now, we saw in the Sorry.
Look, it's not on. Can you give it to me? Just give it to me.
You'll fix it.
Just give it to me.
Okay, nice.
Okay, speak into it.
Right.
Is there a gap?
Speak into it.
Sorry, okay. Is there a gap in support for a generic Republican candidate and support for Trump? We saw this in the primaries before with Nikki Haley, that she was way ahead of Biden, say up to about 20 points ahead. So this perhaps might be an indication.
I think you're exactly right. In fact, if she was the nominee, I think she would be leading, and I think she would be the president. Now, in the primaries, it was very interesting. I mean, Trump crushed his opponents in the primaries, but still 15 to 20% of Republicans did not vote for him. That's not insignificant. So where did they go? Many of them cannot vote for a Democrat. I understand that. But some of them, and Haley, you know, all these Republicans, they're so supine, for God's sake. I mean, they all endorse him after he trashes them. I mean, really, it is disgusting. So she endorsed him. Hooray. The question is, where will her voters go? Some of them will go, but in a 2-point race, another point is a big deal. And so that could make the difference. Although Tom was absolutely right, the polls miss the true Trump vote. It's about 2 or 3% off, less than what the polls, 2 or 3% more than what the polls are showing. That could be the whole ballgame.
Yeah, I wish Bruce and my friends at the Wall Street Journal editorial page who make the same argument were right. But the reality is that Donald Trump has done an amazing job of tapping into the widespread anxieties of a lot of people who usually don't vote. And a lot of them are the old white working class who voted Democrat. And a lot of them are based in those Rust Belt states that voted Democrat from Reagan until Trump in 2016. Trump resonated with this new constituency in a way that I don't think in a way that Nikki Haley could. Or George Bush's brother, Jeb Bush. So I think Trump, I mean, I'm not endorsing this because I don't agree with his policies on these issues, but he has found a way of tapping into a new spectrum of opinion. They used to vote Democrat in those Rust Belt states. They vote Republican now.
I do think it's because of his personal qualities that actually do this. He sucks the oxygen out of the room wherever he is. There are presidents that had been extremely telegenic and so forth. Jack Kennedy, of course, Obama, Clinton to a degree, and Reagan. But he is at another level of being able to not only dominate but control those people who are behind him. And so when he departs the stage, the force of his arguments are going to be lessened. But there are historical patterns of protectionism and nationalism in American politics going back to the 30s and even beyond that. And they surfaced again when H.W. Bush was challenged by Pat Buchanan, and Trump has come back. Yeah.
Could I just add to that? This morning, Don Watson, the writer, the Australian, was on ABC Radio, and he used the word avatar. And he, after travelling all over some of those swing states, came up with the explanation that whatever Trump does, he's an avatar that takes the feelings of anger and frustration and drain the swamp feelings, and he projects that. And it doesn't really matter how he behaves. People are angry and they're frustrated and they feel forgotten, and they're coming out for Trump.
And that's why I want Tom to address this, but that's why Hillary made a terrible mistake by calling them deplorables and insulting them.
Yeah.
And so she won the popular vote. America didn't go nuts in 2016. It voted the right way, but not in the Electoral College. But she treated them with contempt, and the empire strikes back.
Question out the back.
John McCarthy. I've just come back from 6 weeks in the United States. Yeah. I have want to ask what your comment is about this. I spent most of my time in Catholic circles in the US, but it included Ryan Anderson of the American Ethics Center and Rusty Reno, the editor of First Things. most of those that I was talking to, this is after Kamala became president, became candidate, most of those I was speaking to, while Republicans thought that there was enough time for the media to get Kamala Harris over the line in the election. But the other thing that is big in Catholic circles was that the end of the Democrats' relationship with the working class could come home to bite them in a big way.
Okay.
First, I just want to say, John, you were the most wonderful ambassador to the Vatican that this country has sent over. And just absolutely great. I also want to ask you, what did the Pope mean when he said yesterday that the lesser of two evils should be chosen? And I also remember in 2016, Trump attacked the Pope. The last time a politician attacks the Pope, you're dead. But no, he attacks the Pope and he gets more votes. Really shocking. But John, I would love for you to just talk for a moment. What did the Pope mean when he said the lesser of two evils? Any guidance there?
You shouldn't ask the audience because they give answers. Let's move on. Now, this question here.
Hi, my name is Chen Jin. I just made this question to you. My issue is not the election itself and the polls. The fundamental problem is that confidence in the integrity of the US election has become a joke. Legal lawsuits, attempted assassinations, mainstream media hype, manipulation of polls and public opinions, presidential debates, all contribute to the...
We got it.
Okay, the last one is just a question. The question now, whether American people will believe or not, and do American people will obey or disobey if Harris declares the winner?
Okay. The question is, will the Americans obey or disobey if Kamala Harris wins in November?
It depends on the margin. If it's a tight margin, I think you could have a repeat to some degree of 2020. It's different in 2024 because the president is not Donald Trump. The attorney general is not Merrick Garland. And the vice president who will count the electoral votes, it will be Kamala Harris. So the structure of the process to finalize the election is profoundly different. And Trump has less reach into it. But if it's a close election, there will be massive lawsuits for recounts in states that he believes. The only elections that Trump trusts are ones that he wins. And the only debates he wins in are those that he says, I won. And that's, he never retreats, never resolves, never apologizes, never goes back.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just add that it takes two to tango. Polarisation goes both ways. America has been simmering in a culture war well before Donald Trump arrived on the scene. I'll give you many examples to demonstrate that point, but one of my other favourite quotes is Robert Gates, who was the Defence Secretary under both Presidents Bush Jr. and Obama. And in 2013, when he launched his memoirs, so again, 2 years before Trump came down on the elevator, Gates said that the greatest national security threat to the United States was not China or Russia or Iran or the Sunni jihadists known as Islamic State. The greatest national security threat was the 2 square miles that encompassed the area around the Capitol building and the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue. In other words, all that toxic polarisation and bitter rancor, that is the greatest national security threat to the United States.
Second last question here.
Thank you both. The first assassination attempt on Trump appeared to give him a bit of a lift, admittedly against Biden. Today we've seen the second assassination attempt. Do you think that'll affect the campaign at all?
I think you give him a little bit of a lift. I think there's sympathy when a leader is attacked like that. But that would come after she's gotten a bit of a lift from the debate. Does it wash it out a little bit? Not sure. But yes, he issued a very measured statement. Nothing. Yeah, he elevated himself in what he said about it today. He thanked the Secret Service today. Last Last week he said maybe maybe there is an inside job in the Secret Service, not to protect.
I just think your point's a good one, and it just raises the point that we're both making, that this is the most volatile and unpredictable presidential race since '68, and a lot can change in 7 weeks.
There will be more surprises.
I've just got a final question that's been sent in earlier about the election process. And the question, she says, last time there was these mail-in ballots coming out of the pandemic. There's still going to be the same number of mail-in ballots, and will they be better controlled this time than they were last time? Because she says in Australia we would never get into something like a mail-in ballot.
That's why Australia is a great country. There will continue to be mail-in ballots. Donald Trump votes by mail in Florida, but there will be opponents of it. His army will question mail-in ballot results. It'll take a long time to count votes in Pennsylvania, and that's the most important state, so it's going to be tense.
Okay. We had a great night tonight. Many thanks to Bruce and to Tom for a lot of information and a very balanced discussion with a great sort of tone to the debate. Very rational, but also a lot of feeling in it. So well done to both of you. I'd love to have you back sometime.